Good morning. Good morning. See, we have a small but cozy group here, right? Welcome. I'm Jacqueline Kiernan MacKay, and I'm director of the Parent and Family Program, and I want to welcome you to Providence College Homecoming 2023. As we know, homecoming at PC is family and alumni weekend all wrapped up into one event. It brings together students, families, alums, faculty, staff, and administrators. It's a celebration of our friar community at its very best, and it's really my favorite time at Providence College. So I'm delighted to welcome students and families here this morning of the class of 2026 and 2027 to our session. Coffee and conversation, ensuring a community of care for students. Incidentally, I have a couple of announcements before we continue. While we don't expect anything to happen this morning during our time together, please note the closest exits within this space. In the event of a fire or a fire alarm, evacuation is mandatory. Please follow the direction of the event staff and proceed out of the building through the closest marked exit area away from clear danger. Also, following this program will be the President's Welcome. Father Sicard will offer his personal greetings to the community promptly at 11 o'clock here right in Peterson. So you don't have to move. You can just, in between sessions, grab another cup of coffee and some goodies. Well, here we are, 5 weeks into the semester, and we know that members of the class of 2027 have spent considerable time and effort adjusting to college life, new courses and professors, working on making new friends, learning to live with roommates, and the list goes on. So many changes in such a short period of time. And for returning students, no doubt you've spent time reconnecting with friends, getting back into a routine of balancing academics and a social life, and perhaps adjusting to some of the changes that have taken place since you left campus in May, like the opening of Shanley Hall. Or we get ready also for the construction of our School of Nursing and Health Sciences. Now, we know that this morning we're going to talk a little bit about how, as a community of care, we come together in taking a proactive approach in meeting the needs of our students. We know that student well-being suffered significantly during the pandemic, a trend reflected at PC and colleges across the country. So in this post-pandemic time, PC has kept a careful watch on students' well-being and mental health. And we've taken a number of steps to increase the capacity to meet student needs. The Division of Student Affairs, led by Dr. Sears, our Vice President, has made student well-being a major theme of their strategic plan, and they've planned a number of initiatives around this theme. The Counseling Center has significantly expanded its staff, and I know you'll be hearing more about that in a little bit. The care team, we have an interdepartmental team which provides intervention and support for students who are struggling. And that team takes a very proactive approach in connecting and reaching out to students and supporting them on many different levels. Our chaplain's office, providing more outreach than ever before, and I know you'll be meeting members of that staff throughout this weekend. Our new Student Success Center, we just celebrated a couple of weeks ago the grand opening, the official grand opening, and blessing of that center. And it really is an academic hub, academic support for students, whether it's academic advising, tutorial services, writing assistance, addressing accessibility needs as well. Basically, at PC, we work at cultivating a strong sense of community. And a big part of that is helping students to see their faculty, their deans, their hall director, their activity programmer, and so on, as all part of this support network. So I'm privileged now to introduce to you some of these campus partners who take a key role on campus in creating this community of support for our students campus-wide. So I'm going to ask them to stand up and want to introduce them to you. Maybe come forward here. The lineup here, right? So we have, let's see, Chad Carnegie, who is our Associate VP of Public Safety. He keeps us safe, he and his team. We have Ed Lepre, who is the Executive Director of Recreational Sports, our intramurals person that are so popular. Molly McGrain, who is the Assistant Director of Student Engagement and Academic Advising, and Molly works with the School of Business. We have Maureen Outlaw, who is the Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences and Associate Professor of Sociology. And I understand she's a gourmet chef as well. We have Beth Scully Terrell, Assistant Dean of Students and Acting Director of Residence Life, and she and her team did a marvelous job in helping our students to move in August. We have Jill Souza, who is the Assistant Dean of School of Education and Social Work, works with students very closely. Allison Chaval, who is the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs, very involved in talking about that strategic plan that I mentioned. And Sharon Hay, we have Interim Director of Student Activities, Involvement, and Leadership. Sharon kind of comes and goes in our office. And of course, we have Brian Marinelli, who is our Assistant Vice President of Student Activities. Student Success. He oversees our Student Success Center. Maybe there are a lot of activities going on there too, right? And I know there's an open house this afternoon, Brian. So I'm 3 to 4, little commercial for student success. So please go over to the library and pop in. But are these folks who are, again, so involved with our students, whether it's in their formal role or more informal outside of the classroom. I hope you get a chance to meet them, to connect with them, and they'll be here throughout the program and later on to mingle with you as well. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're really lucky to have so many people here at PC giving so much of themselves. Now, as I was getting ready for this program today, I couldn't help thinking about a line in our parent and family prayer. And it goes like, "Fill my child's life with deep friendships and connections during these college years in order to form memories that will be cherished and life stories that my family's children will laugh at one day." Life stories. Stories are powerful, aren't they? They delight, they inspire, they motivate, and they help us to understand one another's world. And as we tell stories, we build community, don't we? We weave together information about our views. We generate perceptions and emotional connections that allow us to uncover common interests and shared values and beliefs. And these are the very pillars of a community. So this morning, we have 2 storytellers here from our community, 2 people who have stories to share with us. And they're sitting in those very comfortable chairs next to me. We have Dr. Rosemary Fernandes Mugan, who is the Executive Director of the Personal Counseling Center on campus. She is a first-generation college student, having graduated from Providence College in 1998 and went on to earn her doctorate in clinical psychology in 2006. And also joining us this morning is Father Joseph Guido. Father Guido is a friar, and the prior of the Dominican community on campus. He's in charge, right? He also serves as senior staff psychologist in the Personal Counseling Center and as a faculty member in the Department of Psychology. I won't ask him what he does in his free time. I don't think he has too much there. Anyway, I'm delighted to ask Rosemary to come forward and share her story.
Good morning, parents, students, alumni, faculty, and staff. I'm so honored and appreciative of having the opportunity to be asked to speak a bit about our campus community's long-standing culture of compassion and care for our students. This didn't just start in the last few years. I was specifically asked this morning to speak a bit about my own narrative as it relates to my experience as a former PC student. That was a time that I learned an incredible amount about myself and was influenced and cared for by others in ways that reduced barriers and allowed opportunities for me to fashion a professional and personal journey that I continue on today. What I hope becomes clear from what I share about my lived experience is that Providence College succeeds at its goal of providing an environment where our students not only experience exceptional academic and educational opportunities, but also have access to resources that will allow them to care for their minds, their bodies, and souls when they are struggling in some capacity, and that this is not anything remotely new. People here sincerely want to see our students thrive. The way that the individuals who work here and live here have such compassion for our students who may be facing challenges in their lives is found in so many corners. I experienced that care myself and that compassion myself at so many pivotal moments in my undergraduate career and beyond. As Jackie mentioned, I'm a first-generation college student. My dad was born in the U.S. to Portuguese Madeiran immigrants. English was his second language, but he learned English from a very early age on, so he didn't really have a discernible accent other than a Boston, New Bedford, Massachusetts one. He stopped his schooling when he was in the 8th grade. That was much more common at that point in the United States for individuals to drop out before going into high school. My mom was born on Madeira Island, emigrated to Brazil in her 30s, and met my dad via a mutual friend. They married in the U.S. in the mid-70s. English was my mother's third language, and she taught herself English via books and reading magazines, listening to records, and just simply by practicing. My mother's father had died when she was 7. She was the oldest of 5 children, but was raised in an orphanage from then on because my grandmother couldn't afford to raise all 5 children after his passing. So my uncles stayed on the sugarcane farm, and the 2 girls, including my mom, had to connect in this orphanage where they received their schooling. My mom saw my grandmother weekly, and when she was of age, stayed actually to help in the school that the nuns at the orphanage were at. She never went on to college, but was able to work within a teaching capacity in the village. Of course, that teaching career didn't translate into one here in the U.S. when she came. My mom had obtained a seamstress job in a curtain factory in New Bedford when I was 3. She was on her feet all day in an incredibly hot environment to then come home and provide whatever was needed within our apartment. My dad's health had been deteriorating as soon as I was born. He was diagnosed with a condition called ankylosing spondylitis. By the time I was in 5th grade, he only had control over his right arm and was bedridden, needing 24/7 care. My mom quit her job to work and care for him, and we survived on his tiny pension from a few years of civil service work and his disability payments. We were that family that received free cheese, free butter, bread, Thanksgiving dinners donated at our door. Medical emergencies were not atypical, and the dedication that my mom had for his care really is difficult to describe. Doctors nicknamed her Mighty Mouse, for those of you who remember that cartoon from way back when. She was 4'8" and somehow figured out how to manage his physical care with very, very little help. My parents didn't think they could have children. I was a bit of a surprise when I came to be. And as an only child, any resources we did have, my parents wanted to be able to dedicate to my education in any way that they could. They wanted me to have any chance of not perpetuating our financial circumstances. And they knew that I was a solid student who just couldn't stop reading to learn more about what was outside of our little space in New Bedford, Massachusetts. When the time came to consider colleges, I casted a pretty narrow net. I didn't quite know what I was doing, and got certainly some direction from my guidance counselor, but essentially figured it out on my own, my applications, the FAFSA, all of it. My friend's older sister went here to PC, so I had some context for the environment here, and so I applied here as well. Long story short, spoiler alert, I ended up here. You've heard that already. This was only 45 minutes from home, so getting home I knew wasn't going to be too difficult, and if I needed to go and help my mom with my dad. Both my parents had really pushed for me to take my education as far as I could. They wanted me to have that different life than what I had been experiencing thus far. My dad's side of the family couldn't understand why I would go anywhere that wouldn't lend itself to me staying home all the time. There was an expectation that I help with my dad's care, but my parents would have none of that. I had gotten a strong aid package, but I was going to clean out my parents' savings in less than the year. Either way, my mom, very adamant about my calling financial aid to thank Providence College for having faith in me and providing me with the funding that they did award. And it was always my mom's way. Take stock, be grateful, be gracious, have faith that God's going to provide if it's meant to be. I ended up on the phone with Brother Kevin O'Connell, a man I owe an incredible I owe so much to him. For those of you who knew Brother Kevin, may he rest in peace, you'll know that he could have a bit of a curmudgeonly exterior, but my goodness, was that like covering this heart of gold. I thanked him for the package I received, let him know I was going to do my best to get the best grades that I could in order to earn more financial aid, because I had no idea how it worked. It doesn't work that way. So he figured some things out. He started to ask me a bit more about myself, my family, what I wanted to do with my life, asked me to write some things up and send them to him, and said, I'm going to see if you can potentially be eligible for anything else, any other aid. Within a week or so, I received a new letter congratulating me on my full Textron scholarship. I received a 4-year one, tuition, room, and board. And that was the first time that I experienced the heart of the mission of Providence College so many people here carry out, the goal to provide opportunities for our students to thrive. I got to PC and had to learn a very new language, the language of higher ed. I really thought that someone's first name was Dean, and then I met another Dean. Went, wow, there's a lot of people named Dean here, and then I figured it out. I was mentored by Dean Valesi Kamajong. We bonded over our only child status. She was the dean of the Balfour Center for Multicultural Affairs. I became a psychology major, partially because I knew I was just so interested in people. I also knew I somehow wanted to be able to assist people. Didn't know what that would translate into, but I also knew I wanted to learn more about my own family and our family dynamics, because I knew that there was just so much I could glean personally from that. I threw myself into every opportunity I could. Urban Action, campus ministry, BOP, academic honors, orientation leader, the Balfour Center itself. My world was just so newly open in ways I didn't know existed. I used our own counseling center, partially to grieve a crush that freshman year, but also I really needed to talk to someone about how scared I was that I could mess something up and mess up this opportunity. I couldn't imagine losing it after starting. PC became a true home to me, so much so that when my dad had died at the very beginning of my senior year, that the care and compassion I felt in that very first phone call with Brother Kevin was mirrored in this community's response to my father's passing. From Father Berenger, the campus chaplain at the time, being the celebrant at my dad's mass, to the wake the evening prior, when my mom and I were overwhelmed with the number of students and staff that attended. We just felt so held. Even my mom felt held by Providence College during that time. And when my mom had died in 2012 after a long battle with early onset Alzheimer's disease, Father Joe, who you'll hear from momentarily, was there to officiate at my mom's funeral mass. So I was supposed to go to grad school right away. After senior year, I'd gotten into Smith's MSW program, but I was exhausted. I was confused. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with any degree in the end. And it was actually during that senior year that it became pretty clear my mom might have early onset Alzheimer's. And what happened was that my mentors here, including Father Joe, encouraged me to listen to myself, that I knew I needed a bit of time off. I needed that gap year. And it was in that gap year, as an alumnus, that Father Joe suggested I start to look at PsyD programs, a doctorate in clinical psychology. Even after I left here, people still cared. People still showed that compassion, that interest. And after I graduated and went on to that degree is when I met the person I married, my husband, and we got married here at St. Dominic Chapel. So there's pieces all over. Of course, there's so many details in between, but along the way, I ended up specializing in college mental health before it really became the specialization that it is today. At the end of my postdoctoral year, a new position in the counseling center here had opened up in 2006, and here I am. I started as a staff psychologist and was really supported in almost every initiative I and my colleagues proposed, when many other college counseling centers were actually attempting to limit services and counseling center resources. I asked to start a training program in 2010 in our counseling center to bring on interns and externs from various graduate programs, and we began an official one within a year. Why? Because PC had faith that it would be good for our community while fostering the development of future psychologists, social workers, and other mental health treatment providers. In 2015, I became the interim director of the counseling center and then was hired into the position later in 2016. In the last 17 years, many challenges remain the same that I had faced when I was a student. I've worked with countless students, some of which are first gen, that feel that same fear and anxiety of I can't mess this opportunity up that I had felt long ago. However, our students today have additional challenges in comparison to even a few years prior to the pandemic, let alone in 1998. What I and my classmates did not have to manage while in college was social media, how much time we were online, a pandemic that separated us from each other in some way, and for some families leading to increased financial instability. We are in the midst of a period where the Surgeon General has declared a public health advisory about youth mental health being in crisis. We're already seeing significant declines in student mental health prior to the pandemic. And as the stage was already set to exacerbate that with the pandemic. In the spring of 2022, in the American College Health Association survey of over 54,000 students, 77% reported experiencing moderate to severe psychological distress. When I started working here at PC, we saw about 8 to 9% of the undergraduate community, and now we see about 20%. Our students, thankfully, are experiencing less stigma in accessing resources, but we also know that our students often are in need of those resources at a higher rate than when we look at 20 years ago. What we ended up seeing are many college campuses started to issue session limits, same-day crisis sessions, but not allowing for continuity of care. And PC, again, had none of that. We remained dedicated to providing ongoing care in our counseling center. And what ended up happening was additional resources being provided in that context, not in pivoting to third-party telehealth platforms. And you'll hear a little bit more about what those resources are. We've been able to expand and have specialized care in our counseling center around substance use and addiction treatment, student-athlete mental health and mental performance work, diversity-related concerns, and other areas particular to college mental health. Just as important, PC has recognized that it takes a village. If a counseling center is the only place that is considered to be an area where student mental health is prioritized, that counseling center will fail. We have our campus partners here this morning that are a part of our network of care for our students, people I feel very privileged to call colleagues. Everywhere you turn, just like when I was a student here, someone is talking about how a student is doing, their overall wellness, with an understanding that wellness enhances academic success. We have a multidisciplinary team run out of the Dean of Students office, the Campus Assessment Response and Evaluation team, the CARE team, to have a place where students, faculty, staff can connect when they are concerned about a student, so that those students can meet with a campus partner within the CARE team and have a space to figure out where else will there be direct assistance that might be appropriate for the student. And that referral often goes beyond just our counseling center. I encourage you to connect with our campus partners this morning, even if you don't think your student may be in need of them, just so you can truly experience for yourselves that authentic, genuine care and concern for our student body in all senses of their well-being. I thank you so much for your time this morning, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend here with your students. And I leave the podium to Jackie.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'm thinking as Rosemary is talking as an alum and sharing her story, this weekend, as you engage with families and friends and roommates, I encourage you also to connect with our alums, to hear their stories, to learn about how they maximize their PC experience, the impact it had on developing lives of meaning and purpose. And no doubt, they will talk fondly of their friendships they made at Providence, but also point, as Rosemary did, to a chaplain, a professor, a counselor, a dean who played a significant part in their lives. So take advantage of this weekend. Father Joe?
Good morning. I've been told that the best compliment a teacher can receive is to have a former student excel and even outshine the teacher. Rosemary is such a compliment for me. Thank you so much, Rosemary, for all that you do, and thank you so much for sharing your story today. It's both inspiring and comforting. As Jackie noted, I serve in several different capacities here at Providence College, and I've done so for just shy of 30 years. So what I'd like to do this morning is to tell 3 stories about 3 different students from the perspective of each of the capacities that I serve in. Capacity as a teacher, as a psychologist, and as a priest. And I hope that in sharing these stories from the past, that they give us insight into not only how we provide a community of care presently, but how we need to think about it going forward as well. The first young woman, I'll call her Olivia, was in my section of Introduction to Psychology one fall. Nearly everyone in the section was a freshman or sophomore. But she stood out. She was bright, inquisitive, rather bold in volunteering for role-playing and differing examples. But when it came time for the first test in the semester, just about now, she failed the test, and failed not just by a little, but by a lot. And it led me to be deeply concerned about her, so I asked her to come to my office hours so that we could talk to see what went wrong and how we could remedy it going forward. And when she came to my office, she was very sheepish, obviously very embarrassed. And I asked her to sit down and close the door, and we began to talk. And I said, "Olivia, what do you think went wrong?" And her eyes welled up with tears, and she said, "I couldn't afford the textbook." She and her family were immigrants to this country, and she was now in a single-parent household. And each weekday before coming to campus, she would drive her mother for treatments for cancer, and then drive her back home and cook breakfast for her mother and her younger siblings. And after a day on campus with class and studies, she would take a shift at the local CVS to ensure that they would have money coming into the family, even as her mother was no longer able to work. I was deeply touched by what she told me, but also anxious to do something and not knowing what I could do to help her. And so that evening I chose to break the law, and I Xeroxed the textbook, and the next day gave her a whole stack. She ended the semester with a B+, after all that it began and all that ensued. What's interesting about this story for how we are now is that I told several other people I had this student that couldn't afford the textbook and I didn't know where to get one, so I Xeroxed it. And people said, "Well, we should do something about that." And variously, at different levels of the administration, that became a reality. So that today, all students' textbooks are free to them, because the college chose to underwrite the buying of those books for students so that there'd be an equity among those who would be capable of buying those books and those who were not. And what this suggests, I think, about going forward in terms of creating a community of care and support is that we need to listen to students. We need to know them well enough to know their needs. So then, knowing their needs, we can provide for them as they need us to provide for them. And that entails building a series of relationships at various levels of depth and being able to share what we learn with one another. The second student, I'll call him Eric, was a strapping young man, varsity athlete, finance major. And he found his way to me because a friend of his family recommended me. And when Eric came to my office and I asked him, "How can I help you?" he said, "I'm not sure." He knew only that he was feeling listless in his studies, and he was losing the zeal for his sport, and it was beginning to show in his performance. He said that many nights he would sleep very little, and other nights he would sleep way too much, even missing practice or class. And over time he began to tell me about his family, a working-class family riven with a history of mental illness and substance abuse, and being far from home, wanting to be closer to them, feeling an obligation to care for them, even as he was pursuing his education, and not sure how he could balance the two. On one level, it was clear that he was suffering from depression, and we addressed that. But there was a broader issue here for him, an issue of identity and vocation and purpose. We met for 3 years, sometimes intensely, once a week for months, other times intermittently or even just occasionally. And in senior week, just before his commencement, we met up on campus. And he came and gave me a great bear hug. And then he said, with his hands on my shoulders, "Father Joe, I love you, and I thank you for everything. but I never want to see you again. And he hasn't. The lesson, I think, about creating a community of care and support from Eric is that our work is not simply about remedying the difficulties that these young people experience and providing and trying to meet their needs, but also encouraging them and helping them germinate a self that is confident and resilient and capable of living a life of purpose and meaning relatively on their own. And so, in a sense, there is a kind of parental element to the community's care. We give all that we can while they're here in the hope of providing them with what they need when they're on their own. And given the nature of our economy and our society today, with its divisiveness and partisan, its questioning of truth and of goodness and rightness, that becomes all the more critical and all the more challenging to do. The final student I'll call Kayla. Kayla was raised in a family that was divided in many different ways. Divided by divorce, divided by ideology, divided by locale, and divided by religion. And so she came to PC with no real religious background or understanding. A very bright student, a member of the honors program, double major at one point. We talked on occasion about the search for faith. Her questions about the veracity of the New Testament, the clash between the teachings of the church and the reality of human life, the kind of difficulties young people are wrestling with in terms of identity, vocation, moral choices. She grew more and more interested in and adept at that level. But what I realized as we talked was that her faith, such as it was growing primarily in the context of her peer relationships. She had fallen in with and become friends with a group of young people who were devout in their faith, even as they were devout in seeking fun and devout in seeking knowledge and devout in serving other people. They were the ones who invited her to the late-night Mass on Sunday evening at St. Dominic Chapel. They were the ones who invited her to tell the social events that the campus ministry sponsored. And they were the ones she looked to for support when she was caught in binds between believing and not believing. It was very striking. This summer, Kate came with her husband and her children. I hadn't seen them in 4 years because of COVID, and it was a delight to see them. She had 5 of the 6 children, the youngest of whom was 5, when we went to Ray for lunch, and the 5-year-old declared after having a smash burger and fries covered in ketchup, "I'm coming to PC for college." So if there's a doubt about how to recruit future students, it's to take them early to Ray and let them eat. Okay. But what was striking was I looked at them. I had the opportunity to baptize and confirm Kayla. And I had the privilege of presiding at her wedding with her husband. And to look over more than 20 years after graduation and to see the fruition of her faith, of her life, was an extraordinary privilege for which I'm grateful. But her experience suggests something I think critical as well, that for many of our students, it is their peer relationships, the social context in which they exist, that is in some ways the most formative aspect of their lives here. And that has great promise, but also some peril. Because I think we have to acknowledge that there is, as we know, a precipitous decline in religious identification and participation in our country, and especially among young people. And we also have to admit that here, as in most colleges and universities, students' culture is an admixture of zeal and idealism and a kind of immersion and that which is detracting from their human dignity, a culture often fueled by excessive alcohol and drugs, and all the risky behaviors that follow upon them. So what we need to do is to enhance that kind of thriving peer community that can sustain their development and can foster their faith. And one of the things that's actually happening on campus now to a greater degree than in my memory ever before is peer-to-peer ministry. Campus ministry has what is called peer ministry, in which upper-class students mentor and guide and support first and second year students. Hundreds of students are involved in this. The clergy and the lay campus ministers are at some distance from it, precisely so that it is that kind of peer environment, that social context, that can serve as the good, rich soil for faith to evolve, and with faith's evolution, the evolution and emergence of their true selves. So I think the lesson of Kayla and her experience as we look forward is, how do we as a community challenge and restructure the less than salient and helpful elements of student culture, and how do we promote at a deeper level, with a greater extension, of student culture that is that good, rich soil. In the end, I think we want to see our students leave PC having an answer to Aristotle's most profound question: what is the good life worth living? And having accepted Jesus' most intimate invitation: come to me, all you who are weary and find life burdensome, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke on your shoulders, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will know peace, for my yoke is easy and my burden light. Thank you.
Powerful stories. First of all, thank you, Rosemary, again, for sharing so much of yourself, and for Joe, for those moving stories. Father, thank you. Thank you. I think the message that we're all giving here, and I know we have to wrap up, but the message we're all giving here is that no student has to make this journey alone, right? It unfolds in the company of friends and helpers. Friends and helpers, we're all here together. Thank you. Enjoy your weekend and safe travels. Thank you.